podcast. I am your host, John Keene. As always, I would like to thank you guys for joining me. Only Rumble Studio. All right, so tonight we're going to be doing a live stream. This is just kind of impromptu. We're going to be talking about sorcery. So this is the power of sorcery. So if anybody is seeing this, like picking this up, seeing me, hearing me, please let me know in the chat that you guys can see me, that you can hear me. I'm kind of trying to test this out. So just give me a heads up if you guys can see me and hear me, and just kind of let me know that the audio and video is coming through. Tonight we're going to be talking about the power of sorcery. You know what? I think this is a very, very important topic, and it's been like forever since I've done a live stream. So I'm actually kind of nervous, just to be honest, just because it's been so long. But you know, I think what a lot of people don't know when it comes to sorcery, we've got this idea. Yeah, thank you, John. Audio, visual, good. Okay, now let me know when I go into my apps. You guys can still see me and hear me. Hopefully, you guys can see me and hear me. Just let me know in the chat if you can still see me and hear me. Hopefully, if not, I'll restart the stream. But I'm just making sure that I'm able to screen share and all that good stuff, and I don't need to put on my headphones and all that. So tonight we're going to be talking about the power of sorcery. We're going to do a really deep dive. It's been forever since I've done one of these, so we should be multi-streaming. It looks like we're on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Twitch. I don't think we're streaming over on X, but fuck it. We'll upload to wherever, get it live a little bit later. But we're going to be jumping into the power of sorcery. So give me one moment here. I'm trying to make sure everything gets started. Welcome back. Thank you. Thank you so much. You guys can still hear me, see me. We're rolling good. Somebody else let me know. Say, hey, the audio's good, John. It's good. Or I can see you. I can hear you. It looks like it's good. It looks like it's lighting up. Good to see you again. Yeah, let me know if you guys can hear me though. Audio and visuals are good. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to be jumping to the power of sorcery tonight. Now, one thing, I've been studying this quite a bit recently. Okay, so I've been diving into this in my own personal studies, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. Not just for something that people can use. And first off, let me just say, if you're underage or you're a kid or some shit like that, you should probably not be watching this one. So parental advisory, right? Parental advisory. And I'm not an expert or anything like that. I'm just a regular ass dude talking about some shit I'm incredibly interested in. But I have been doing this. I have been studying this for over a decade. So you're going to probably be hard pressed to find a lot of people who studied this. Thank you so much. Thank you for the feedback. You're going to be hard pressed to find a lot of people who know as much about this really as I do. So I want you to kind of think here, and kind of look at within the history of mankind, if we're looking at shit, especially from a biblical perspective, and that's where we're going to kind of start with all of this, is a biblical perspective. We're going to, take a look at the garden first off, right? We have Adam and Eve in the garden, and there was this corruption, if you will, right? This corruption that took place within mankind, okay? Many people will be familiar with, the serpent there. He comes and he beguiles Eve, right? He tells her, he's basically, God doesn't want you to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Surely you won't die, right? Because, she's like, we can eat from any of the trees within the garden except from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because God said if we eat from it or even touch it, that surely we will die. So the serpent says, no, you won't die, but it'll open your eyes like God. And basically, God doesn't want you to be like him, right? Knowing the knowledge of the good and evil, right? So after this takes place, this deception takes place, and we don't really know per se what actually happened with that deception. We do know that in Genesis, when it talks about how the earth, it was formless and void, that this actually means of desolate and destruction. So there was like a previous creation before all of us, before humanity today, before what we now know as humanity and Adam. There was previous versions of humankind in the past because of that, key in Genesis. We also know that with the birth of Cain and Abel, when she talks about her two children, right? When she says Cain, she says it means basically Cain means something like a, from of the Lord, or a gift of the Lord, begot of the Lord, some shit like that, basically. So it's basically saying, of the Lord, bless me with this seed. So it's basically saying like this is a godly seed, right? We know the story of Cain and Abel, right? Am I my brother's keeper? And then we see, sin being introduced by murder, right? Because basically God wasn't happy with the serpent seed, one seed being from the serpent, one seed being from Adam, right? With mankind. And that's where Seth comes in to kind of replace the original, son who was killed. So we think, what was actually introduced with all of this, and why was it such a big deal, right? Because learning the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you have to think, right? This is um, on a deeper level, it's like us looking at the duality of reality, right? The darkness and the light, right? Life and death. Whenever we had this knowledge introduced to us, it was like a spiritual death had been introduced. And ever since this point, and I heard it put like this basically. Like if you had two parents that were basically HIV positive, right? This corruption, this genetic spiritual corruption that took place in the garden, right? That was introduced from our forefathers, from Adam and Eve, right? So everything after them, it's like if you had two HIV positive parents, this original sin, just because the kids didn't do anything, they're still going to be born HIV positive, right? Kind of the same premise here. You have this spiritual corruption that was introduced with the knowledge of the good and evil. So every one of us from this point on have that spiritual corruption. It kind of takes you to the book of Enoch too, where we see the story of the watchers. And we got to kind of think too, when we look at like the etymology of the words, we look at God, and God being the Lord of hosts, right? The Lord of hosts. And when we look at what the heavenly hosts are, it's actually, different words for, luminaries, angels, watchers, right? So the heavenly hosts are the angels. They're the stars, the luminaries, they're the watchers. They just stand up above in the firmament watching mankind, but they do not intervene. So this takes us into the planets, right? Because we know in the book of Enoch, it talks about these 200 watchers, and they had leaders amongst them, Semyaza, Azazel, whose all sin was ascribed, et cetera, right? And what did they do that was so atrocious, right? That was so bad, right? They brought this knowledge to the earth, right? Taught us how to wear makeup, how to wear jewelry, how to, make medicine from roots. Basically, they brought in witchcraft and pharmakia. Okay, they brought in witchcraft and pharmakia. Now, we could look at this as two different things. We could look at this as one, spiritual corruption was introduced on a genetic level, right, with the serpent in the garden. And was that genetic corruption purely, Eve reproducing, with this seraphic being, this serpent being? Or was it on a deeper level? Was this actually some type of knowledge being introduced, and Enoch is just telling another story of this? Well, we know that the punishment was so great in the book of Enoch because God, he's like to these angels, to these watchers, basically. And you got to think the word planets, and we're about to get into this. I'm just trying to kind of give you like a bird's eye view of this. So it's like when we look at like planets in the Hebrew, we have it here, wandering stars. So the biblical phrase, one of the strongest passages are in Jude 1:13, where Jude describes raging waves of the sea, foaming out of their own shame, wandering stars to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. Now we think about this. These wandering stars in Hebrew, wandering stars is planets. So we have the original, the Lord of hosts, which is God. We have the heavenly hosts, which are the stars or the luminaries, right? And then we have these wandering stars, which we call the planets. Those would be the pantheon of gods that we see within the solar system, right? Saturn, Mercury, and we hear them with a variety of different names, right? You know, Saturn, Satan, Mercury, Hermes, Thoth, um, Venus, Aphrodite, Lucifer. You can go on and on and on and on. Mars, Aries, right? We could go on and on. Jupiter, Thor, uh, all of these different gods, right? This pantheon of gods, these seven main gods, right? These are the ones that were cast to the outer darkness. The outer darkness being, the hidden or the deep, or outer space, right? Outer space. And these guys are basically, they're out there for 10,000 years. And remember, when these watchers are punished by God, not only did he punish them, because for one, they knew the glory of God, they had seen God for themselves, right? So basically, they had no excuse for what they did. But if you know the original story where there's basically this jealousy, where God has made two different creations. The first creation being these seraphic and cherubic beings, right? These angelic entities. These angelic entities are like a fixed being, right? They have their free will, in essence, is to choose to do the service of God. Now, the third of these angelic beings that chose to go against what God had predetermined for them and you would almost think like angels wouldn't have this sort of free will, right? But apparently they did as well, because when they chose to not follow that predestined path that God had set out for all these angelic beings, a third of them rebelled with Satan, right? When a third of them rebelled, it basically inverted them get their gifts. So instead of say you were an angel with the power of healing, now you bring the power of sickness, right? It's the inverse. It's the polar opposite of what your predestined calling, for your angelic life was, right? So they had this free will too, basically, and they were called the sons of God, right? So they believe that they are the offspring of God, but God in his plan, he was going to use them, to in the process of creating us, which we were made in the image. So you have this jealousy, you have this envy, and that's where the enmity is created between the serpent seed, right, and man, where it would strike our heel, we would strike its head. The serpent, it's cursed to its belly to eat the dust for the rest of its life. Well, guess what? Man was cursed, from the dust you came, from the dust you shall return. So think about this. You have this judgment by God because they introduced this witchcraft and idolatry and immorality and all of this into humanity. They were punished. They were cast into the outer darkness, never to return to heaven. And because they chose to be the opposite of God and heaven and whatever dimension and whatever energy that entails, we know that God, he's the breath of life. He has the purifying waters, which cleanse. So hell or Tartarus or Sheol, is the total opposite of that. It's minus everything that is the properties of God, right? So that's why you hear these people telling stories like when they're sent to hell, or they have these NDEs, these near-death experiences, and they experience hell. They're talking about it's impossible to breathe. It's so hot. There's no water. Why? Because it's lacking all of the properties that come from the Spirit of God, right? It's absent of all of that. And God doesn't sentence anyone to hell. Basically, we all choose that through our life choices. And these angelic beings were no different. When they rejected their original calling and purpose, they chose that for themselves. And there was a place created, Tartarus, Sheol, hell, whatever you call it, right? That was set aside for beings that wanted no part, of God, right? So you have this being introduced to us, and remember, God tells them in the book of Enoch, he tells them, like, you didn't even know, like, what I had planned. You didn't know the fullness of my plans, and you went ahead and intervened and corrupted man, So now with this corruption in place, it kind of makes you, and it kind of makes you think, like, what would warrant such a punishment? Why would there be something? What would be one way if this seed is so envious of humanity, right? And so envious of our, of us being made in the image of God, what would be the one way that they would be able to corrupt us, like, and get the most, the most pound for pound in their punch, basically, the most, punch? And that would be to introduce this corrupt knowledge, right? Which allows us to bend and manipulate reality, which is the opposite of following the will of God by doing things for our own selfish purposes and our own selfish reasons, right? And thus witchcraft, sorcery is introduced. Now, when this corruption was brought in, now this is, before Christ, right? You look at like the whole story of Christ, and we're about to jump into the notes here, but you look at the story of Christ, and basically, God promises through the seed of David that, he's basically trying to restore us into the pre-Genesis time, right? Like what we were in the Garden of Eden. So he comes through the line of David and all this through Mary. But because, like I said, both those parents being, HIV positive, right? He couldn't use two corrupt. That's why Joseph wasn't able to be the father, right? That's why it was the Immaculate Conception, because we had got into covenant with the serpent being. When we made that deal in the garden, we came into covenant and we fell under, because of this covenant, we came into agreement with this being, and the price was basically our souls. That's where the spiritual death came into place. And we do this every day. That's what's crazy about this. Most people don't even realize this. But every day, through our decisions, our choices, everything that we choose to participate in, we are in covenant with certain spirits. There is a spirit behind everything. And I was talking to somebody earlier, and I was like, kind of like breaking it down like this. And here, let's start here, matter of fact. So, and when we look at this too, like, it doesn't matter, there are spirits, and it's like you say, oh, well, there's not a spirit behind something. It's like you just don't understand, because if you look at like these planets, for instance, and I'm just going to give you a hypothetical, say we're looking at like Satan or Saturn, right? That planet, that energy in particular, there are numbers, right? 666, right? That correlate to that particular energy or frequency. There are, minerals or metals like lead that correlate to that particular frequency. It goes all the way down, right, to the most basic level, right, that correlate to that energy or frequency. So when we look at like pharmakia, or we look at witchcraft, just because it doesn't appear to have a conscious energy behind it doesn't mean that it doesn't, right? Whether you're experimenting with substances or you're doing particular practices like tarot, astrology, all of this, right? You're not just getting something for nothing, right? There is a spirit behind astrology. And whenever you interact with said spirit or said frequency, you are in covenant with that spirit or frequency. And see, here's the thing. Because we are basically spiritually blind, we don't always know what that covenant entails. We don't always know, what that deal is, right? So we're just trying to look up our fucking horoscope, basically, right? Or trying to look at, our natal chart astrologically, but by us engaging with that, with the astrology, there's an entity behind that, and we're in covenant with that, making an agreement with that, and we're getting the future, but we're also giving something in return. Now let's go look first here with the wandering stars. Like I said, the raging waves of the sea forming out of their shame, wandering stars, to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. All right. So the Greek expression for the wandering stars or planet is asteres planetae, literally associated with wandering stars or planet. This is particularly interesting because the ancient world distinguished the planets from the fixed stars because the planets appeared to wander across heaven. And think about this. The reason they're called the wandering stars is because they transgressed from their original position. If we look at God as being the Lord of hosts, then we look at the stars or the watchers or luminaries as the heavenly host, right? They're just watching, they're not intervening. That's why they're way up above the firmament, they're up in the night sky, right up in the heavens. Well, when you look at our solar system, at the planets or wandering stars, they have actually got involved. That's why these 7 main planets rule the 7 days of the week, the 7 chakras, the 7 colors of the rainbow, right? All of these things. So they literally they are the rulers of the reality, or the archons. They have dominion over the physical world, right? They have transgressed their original position and are interacting with the physical world. Now, let me grab this actually. We're going to move to the sorcery here. All right. Now, whoops. All right. Hopefully, we're still rolling here. All right. You guys can hear me? I think you guys still hear me. All right. Hopefully, you guys can still hear me and see me. Oh, that's good. So, all right, we're going to jump back here. So, where am I at? And you guys will have to forgive me, dude. I am super rusty. I haven't done a live stream and I don't know how fucking long. So, um, if you guys haven't, check me out, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Rumble, all that good stuff. And if you want to, leave a tip or donate, support the work, PayPal, the Best Damn Podcast, Cash App, Best Damn Podcast, or you can join us over on Patreon. So here we go. The dark power of sorcery, magic, witchcraft, demons, and the biblical warning. Now, if we look at the definition of sorcery, the word sorcery comes from the Latin sortorius, one who casts lots. Now, think about this. If you look in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, and I kind of heard it put like this, the one who casts lots. Now, they did this even after Jesus died. So I heard someone say this, but it's not actually true. They said that, once Jesus transfigured and transmuted and like ascended back up to the Father and, basically became the Holy Spirit, that you never see anybody casting lots again in the Bible, but that's actually not true. Matter of fact, after Judas betrays Jesus in the Bible, you see the disciples casting lots, and that's when they bring Matthias in, right, as a replacement for Judas, right, as one of the disciples. So you see them casting lots basically all through the Bible, especially Old Testament. And I just want to tell you too, when it comes to casting lots is like an old school ass form of fucking tarot. That's what it is. It's like a glorified form of tarot. So all through the Bible, you see people talking about astrology. You see people talking about casting lots, which is kind of like a form of tarot. So you see divination kind of be spoken about all through, especially the Old Testament. And even if you think about when Jesus was born, who were the people that came to the manger for his birth bearing gifts? It was the Magi, right? Now, Magi is short for, magician, magus, right? Magus, magician. These were magicians. These were sorcerers, right? Now remember, when we look at this too, now the one who casts lots is associated with divination, spells, the communication with spirits, attempting to manipulate unseen forces, ritual practices intended to gain power, knowledge, healing, protection, or influence. And like I said, divination, it can be pendulums, it can be runes, it can be tarot, astrology. There's fucking rods. There's all kinds of stuff when it comes to divination. Um, of course, we know spells, and that can be like the audible word, that can be writing something down. Herbs, sacrifices, etc., etc. We're going to get into the different things and what's actually taking place and how we ignite these elements and what's actually happening when we're bringing something into fruition. And we're going to see, like, through the Bible, there's about 1,000 different warnings against witchcraft, and I'm going to tell you why. So back in the day, I used to have this belief that basically the reason that the occult was hidden was because that is what they used to control the world, right? That's what they used to control the masses, the powers that be, if you will, the elites. And I feel like a lot of people still have that school of thought, right? They believe that this hidden knowledge, this gnosis, this occultic knowledge is what the elite or the initiated use to manipulate the masses and to kind of influence world events. And, I used to believe that myself, and I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. It most definitely does on some type of level. But I believe there's a different reason of why they try to keep people like you and I from knowing anything about this stuff. And it actually goes, it's actually not as deep. It's Occam's razor. It's not the most obvious answer sometimes is the answer. And it's like, uh, the shit is so dangerous, right? The shit is so dangerous. And it's so, and if you've ever had any sort of experimentation with any of, witchcraft, sorcery, the occult, then you yourself will know that it is a trial and error, type of thing. I don't care how many fucking grimoires you read. I don't care how much you know about metaphysics. I don't care if you've studied every planet, every chakra, every element, everything, right? You can study this stuff for decades and still cast a spell and it blow up in your face and make you regret the day that you were born, you know? And anybody who's ever practiced this stuff knows this, right? They know it. That's why a lot of people who do practice, they don't try to influence certain things, because they don't want the repercussion from it. And if you think about these fallen angels or these watchers, when they intervened with mankind, why were they punished so fucking harshly, right? Why were they punished so harshly when it comes to, them revealing these occult secrets, them revealing the witchcraft, to us, and it was a knowledge of spells, curses, all of this, right? When they revealed this to us, they were cast out forever, right? They were cursed forever into outer darkness and covered in rocks and ice and shit, right? Like they will never be forgiven for what they did, right? Just by introducing that knowledge to humankind, and you look at it and you look at like their offspring as well, right? The Nephilim, and how they had these magical powers and all of this, and what ended up happening to them as well, right? They basically devoured one another and killed each other with all of this, right? They have this incredible punishment that never has forgiveness, just by bringing this into the human consciousness. That should make you think right there. Like, how fucking powerful is it if God was so angry for these angelic entities telling us about this that he cursed them eternally. He threw them into outer darkness. They were done. No forgiveness. No get backs. Like it's over, right? You're done. You fucked up so bad. You fucked everyone else, right? Like we have Jesus and all this. We can be forgiven. God redeemed us. And it's like we had to be redeemed. We had been corrupted through this serpent, and we had these fallen angels after this corruption come down and try to teach us some stuff that basically we had no business messing around with, that allowed us to bend and manipulate the reality to our will, right? And if you think about it, and this is the thing, you gotta kind of look at like what the attributes of God are as opposed to what the attributes of, the enemy or adversary is. And if we look at what the attributes of God are, God being the omnipresent, omnipotent, creative energy, um, that basically created everything, including you and I. It's in this. It's this eternal form of selflessness. It's almost enslaved to its creation. Think about it. There's nothing that you or I can give God, right? God needs nothing from us. There's nothing that we can do for God. And it's not just you and me, it's like anything, right? There's nothing in creation that God receives anything from, right? But yet God is in service to his creation eternally, right? We can all call upon God and God is in service to us. It's in servitude to us. So right there, that's telling you, right? And that's why it's thy will be done, right? So God trying to make us like him, right? It's that selflessness. It's that being in service. It's like not my will, but yours, being in service. Witchcraft does the total opposite of that, right? Do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, right? It's like my will be done, right? Which is essentially placing yourself on the throne of God, right? So you're not trusting God's plan for your life. You're not trusting God's will for your life or any of that. You're taking matters into your own hand. You're placing yourself on the throne of God, saying you know better than God's plan for your life, right? And you are trying to bend, twist, and manipulate everything, to serve you, right? To serve you. Now, if we look at the biblical word translated for sorcery, if we look at Hebrew, and you have to forgive me, I'm not fluent in Hebrew or Greek. So it looks like it's kashaf or kashap, which means witchcraft and magic practices. And most of you are probably familiar with the Greek, which is pharmakia, which means sorcery, magic, often associated with drugs, enchantments, and occult practices. And I was talking to somebody about this earlier. You look at like somebody that's just think about somebody who's like on methamphetamine or something, right? Amphetamines. They have all these people around the world seeing fucking shadow figures and all types of shit. And it's like, um, are these people all just having hallucinations, or is there some doors of perception that's being opened in the mind because of the substance that's being ingested? Right? This substance that's being ingested has it has an equivalence to a frequency. Just like I explained earlier, you look at like Saturn, he correlates to black and gold, 666, lead, right, etc., etc. He's got all these different equivalents all the way down to a mineral, right, that correlates to that frequency. Same thing with substances. That's why it's pharmakia. Amphetamines and shit like that, the same thing. They are equivalent to a frequency, right? So it could be a low vibrational frequency once ingested that's allowing you to be in communion with said spirit, right? So that's why people that are intoxicated on certain substances have certain types of experiences, right? because they are on a certain level of consciousness or having a certain frequency that allows them to be in covenant with that spirit, right? Now, if we look back at ancient Egypt, magic was called Heka, right? So, which makes me think of Hecate, which is the goddess of witchcraft, idolatry, and sexual promiscuity, right? The three-headed goddess. Now, the Egyptians believed that words had power, right? That names contained spiritual authority and rituals could influence reality, and that priests could access divine forces. Now, it's like we kind of look at that, and we're going to look at the Lemegeton too. I'm going to show you guys just, just to kind of give you like, I don't want, and well, hopefully nobody goes and uses any of this shit afterwards, but let's see. We should have the Lemegeton right here. Yeah, Lemegeton Goetia. There it is. Yeah. So we're going to actually look at this. I'm going to show you guys exactly, how all of this connects, right? I'm going to show you how this shit connects and like how these operations actually take place. And I'm not going to, hopefully people don't go use this and, do something stupid. But I mean, I think that, if you look at too, there was just recently like a content creator that unalived himself. And this guy was like releasing, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the dude. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was kind of heavy into the occult as well. And he went out the same way as Tracy Twyman. You guys also, if you're familiar with Tracy Twyman, it's like, it's kind of interesting that these content creators, these influencers, they both kind of go out with this way by unaliving themselves. And both of them, were heavily into the occult, right? Heavily into the occult. Tracy, she would do rituals with Baphomet. Like I said, it's like when people, get involved with this type of stuff, I don't think a lot of people are really are really ready or aware of the things that it can open up in your life. I can tell you this from firsthand experience. When I first started doing content creation years ago, um, I really started to delve deeply into Solomonic magic and Hermeticism, Gnosticism, things like that. And what's crazy is I started off pretty much a Christian fundamentalist, and slowly but surely, as I got into the new age, and I hate to sound like fucking one of those stereotypical people online that are like giving you some warning against the new age and shit like that. But to be honest, it was like I got indoctrinated, slowly but surely through the new age into, the occult and started practicing. And through practicing with the occult, man, it opened up doors in my life that I never wanted open. I mean, I never wanted open. If you've ever looked at anyone that has been a practitioner of the occult for long periods of time, um, no matter who you look at, including Saul in the Bible, right? Like he was fucking with the soothsayers and, witches and shit. And that's basically one of the things that got him dethroned, right? From King David. When you look at a lot of this, what was it, the Witch of Endor or whatever? But when you look at this, a lot of the people that have practiced the occult, there's a couple of things that ends up happening. For one, I believe that, you look at it, it's occult, it's hidden knowledge. The Bible talks about serpent knowledge. It talks about those who have, those who are like children who haven't learned the depths of Satan. And that's what I believe it's actually talking about. The depths of Satan being that serpent knowledge, right? That witchcraft, basically. Witchcraft and all of the occult gnosis, And we've got a concerted effort from a lot of people, and I think they're well-meaning people that are trying to convince a lot of people out there. I have been one of them, but I think it's just being misinformed, ill-informed, or being deceived even. That that we can attain this state of, Christhood just like Jesus. And I'm sorry, I don't think it's actually possible. Whenever we lean on our own understanding, remember, like, the wisdom of man is folly to God, right? Like, it's foolishness to God. And so for us to think that we can attain this state of godhood, or that we can become like Christ, which is supposed to be God incarnate, you know um not only is it like sacrilegious and blasphemous, just to kind of think of, if you're looking at, like, from a biblical point of view, right? It's basically an impossibility. It's like, in our limited form, we just can't even wrap our heads around all these knowledge and mysteries. So what you see is a lot of people that do delve deeply into this stuff, they either end up dying, right? They either end up unaliving themselves, which may or may not be someone else taking them out. What a lot of people don't really even think about, what a lot of people don't even really even truly think about with this shit is, when it comes to government and shit, like, if you have influence, especially, and you're talking about things that are fucking classified, or things that they deem a threat to society, you know, uh, they have the ability to take your ass off the map right there. They don't have to, the Constitution is null and void once you become an enemy to the state. And if the government have studied these things as well, consciousness and all of this as well, then they probably are well aware of how dangerous it actually is, once it's in the hands of the wrong person. So, it's like that recent content creator, Tracy Twyman, or even myself, I experienced targeting and, FBI and all types of crazy shit over the years. I've been sued a million things. It's because there's a certain amount of knowledge being revealed that they don't want revealed to the masses because of the danger in it. And it's like the same reason why God was, you know, so keen on punishing, all the fallen angels. It's like, when they revealed this shit to us, that's what he said. He's like, you didn't even know what my plans were. He's like, so how are you going to reveal this shit to them, like, when you didn't even know? I didn't tell you all of my plans. So it ended up cursing them, because they were trying to place a curse on us, right? By giving us that knowledge, we're no longer innocent. Basically, when you're ignorant of something, you have no idea of how something works, right? You're blameless. But once they, that knowledge of good and evil, once they gave it to us, it's like, we're no longer blameless. And now, just like the curse of the law, it's like, essentially the law, right? The rules of the law, were what cursed us, because it's like, now we know the rules. So once you break those rules and transgress those rules, you're guilty. Same thing with this occult knowledge. Now that you know how it all works, once you transgress it, once you use it for your own benefit, you're guilty. It's the same principle. The same principle. So it's almost like they were trying to give us something that not only we would destroy ourselves with, but that would corrupt us from the inside. And you see any type of serious occult practitioner, usually a few things happen. Like I said, they either pass away, some tragic ass death, or they unalive themselves, or they go fucking crazy. Basically, they go ape shit crazy, because it's like, there are just some we access what, 10% of our brains at any time. We see 0.0000001% of the electromagnetic light spectrum. We've got what, we know 1% of the fucking known universe. Like 98% of the universe is unknown to us. We know nothing. We know nothing, right? We know nothing. It's like, even when we receive something spiritually, notice we receive it in like downloads, right? These are like increments of knowledge. We're getting it like piece by piece, bit by bit, because it's like, if God or spirit or any spirit was to like deliver the full blow, right? Of, to give us like the full fucking punch, of all of the knowledge it had for us, it'd probably, probably blow our fucking heads off our shoulders, just keeping it real, you know. And occult knowledge isn't just understanding, the metaphysics or the laws of creation. It's not just that. That's not, when I talk about occult knowledge, yeah, that's kind of part of it, but that's like the basics. Like it's like you have to understand how it all works before you can even get into it. But it's understanding the power of, word, right? The spoken word, and how spoken words can actually directly influence our physical reality. And we know that to be true. We have scientific proof and evidence. Dr. Miramoto, right? The Japanese, physicist or whatever he is, right? That froze the water, right? They would speak kind things to the water and it would freeze and it would be all symmetrical and beautiful. And then they would say terrible things to the water and be all abstract and ugly. So there was a direct correlation with the words that we speak to our physical reality. And we know that this takes place, all the way down. Same thing with, what is it? Like you got like 16 seconds whenever you have a thought, you have a thought and that thought attracts, you know, like thoughts or like energy. It's basically you got like 16 seconds and it's attracting, things that are similar to it. So they say, like, hypothetically, say you have, you start off the day at home having a bad day, you're pissed off. Well, then you go into the grocery store, and because you have this negative, thoughts, these negative energy, well, there's a long line. Why? Because you're attracted to that. It's vibrationally compatible with your bad mood. So it's only going to worsen your mood. It's basically building momentum. Then you get into a fender bender in the parking lot, or then you get a flat tire on the way home. It's like it's just compiling. Same thing with like good stuff as well. And we know that in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God. So everything was spoken into existence. So the spoken word is powerful as fuck, right? And remember, God, he said, let there be light, right? And it was good, etc., etc. He spoke everything into existence. Christ is the word, right? So the word is creation. Okay. And we kind of like look at this like how we're actually perceiving everything too. So we want to try to like engage all of our senses. So let me go over here. Matter of fact. Now the practice is included protective amulets, incantations, necromantic rituals, magical papyri, healing spells, etc. Now the biblical connection. Exodus 7:10-12. Moses and Aaron went unto Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, now the magicians of Egypt. They also with their enchantments did in like manner. For they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods, right? So it's like you have both sides, right? Both sides are using this kind of like, form of magic, both the good side and the bad side. Those, the Egyptians, their magicians had a knowledge and a working of all of this. If you think about it, they were so intent on all of this. Whenever they went into the afterlife and shit like that, right? What they would do is they would even project, right? Everything from the physical into the afterlife. That's like, so say when they created a tomb, they write shit all over the walls, right? They'd write like, directions for the underworld. They would write, shit for you once you were dead, right? That you could utilize in the afterlife. They would draw paintings and images and symbols, right? Because symbols and all this carry an energetic frequency to it. Not just that, right? They would dress you, right? Physically, put your jewelry on you, all of this, right? And prepare you so as if you were physically journeying. This is all to affect the other realm, right? They would speak things over the body, right? We still do this today when we have funerals, right? The funeral rites, right? It's a rite, it's a ritual, right? Speaking over the body. A lot of times, at these funeral rites or rituals, it's like either to, release the soul or the spirit from purgatory, or to, send it on into heaven, or, that way it can move on. Not only would they put all these things on the walls of the tombs and this, they would create like little figurines, like of the people in that person's life or their animals and shit like that. And even in some cases, they would fucking bury the people in the tomb with members, with like servants and shit. And those servants would die right in the tomb, right? And all of this was to impose, right, into the other realm. They were creating it in this world. Remember, as above, so below. If we look at it, it says, and if we look at it's rulers of the reality, it's from the Nag Hammadi, hypothesis of the archons. And it talks about, the firmament, right? And that basically the firmament was created to separate the waters above the firmament from below the firmament. So it's like when you look at the book of Genesis, it says that we were made in the image of God. Image means a phantom, a projection, or an illusion. So basically, we are a reflection of what's taking place in the physical, or not in the physical, in the spiritual realm above. So even though it seems like we're physical, this is like we're a shadow, we're a shade, right, of our true form. The true form is our consciousness that's actually giving life or giving animation to the physical world. So it's like everything, and it's like as above, so below. So not only, can things be done in the spiritual realm to create something in the physical, if you think of it almost like looking at like a puddle or something. If you stand over like a puddle or a body of water, right, you see your reflection in the water. And even think about it like with the Greek mythology, Narcissus, right? He fell in love with this reflection in the water, right? We are the tale of Narcissus, right? Falling in love with our reflection, right? Thinking that our physical self, the mask that we wear, is our true essence, right? We've fallen in love with the image, basically, instead of the spirit that animates the image. A lot of people believe that the brain is what, where consciousness is, but it isn't. The brain is just a reflection, and so many people have shown this before, that the brain actually resembles a map of the galaxies, right? So the universe and the brain are basically like, the brain is like a reflection of the galaxies and the universes, right? The universe and the galaxies, it's a reflection. The brain is all these, when we look at the brain, it's basically all these synapses and points that are lighting up within our head. These are akin to the galaxies and shit that we're seeing above in space. Same thing when we look at us, like from all the way down. All of our organs represent astrological signs. Um, and a lot of people don't know this. And you look at it like at a metaphysical level too, even the chakras, right? The chakras represented by the 7 planets. So it's like, I think Carl Jung even said, like, that's why we see the story of mankind basically played out in the stars. Um, the story of the Bible is played out astrologically in the stars and in the heavens. And we see this, Christ, all of it, it's played out in that. And it's because, you know, uh, we are consciously creating this reality. I was just showing somebody earlier, like how in the microwave, the background microwave radiation from the stars. And I can actually pull it up. Let's see if I can pull it up. Um, Background microwave radiation of the stars. Let's see if I can pull this up. So, right, right here. As you can see, hopefully you can see how the shit's actually flowing in concentric circles, right? Right, and this is basically proof right here. We're seeing the background radiation of the stars. Notice how if we were corkscrewing through space and we're flying, through fucking space, be corkscrewing behind a sun, you know, we would have, for one, we would have different zodiac signs above us at this point in the game, right? We wouldn't have the same zodiac signs 100,000 years later or 10,000 years later, even. We'd be at a different part of space if we were actually traveling, corkscrewing behind the sun, right? But because we're not, right? And every fucking, until about 500 years ago, everyone believed that the earth was stationary. Everyone believed that the earth was flat. And they all believed that the earth was the center of creation. And the Bible tells us that we're made in the image of God and that we are the center of creation. And if you look at the background radiation of the stars, all of them are spinning around in a circle, right? So it looks like they're circling around us, all of them except for Polaris, right? The North Star, which they believe is the eye of providence or the all seeing eye of God, right? And you look at like the flat earth model too, right? And not to get on that, but you can see, right? Sheol or the underworld underneath us, meaning that all of what surrounds us, being water, meaning like space is actually water. And if you look at any of the stars under a telescope or anything like that, it looks like it looks like a light underneath water, and that's what God said, separating the waters of firmament from the waters above the firmament. And then we had land being brought up, right, to separate the water, underneath. And this would kind of take you to a place to where it's like the earth or like the sun and the moon, like the sun wouldn't be 96 million miles away. It'd be like fucking 4,000 miles away. It'd be like a lot closer than what we've ever been told, you know, and what we've ever been told. And I've tried, and if you look at it, like just my opinion, if you kind of look at this too, I think it kind of looks like an eyeball, even like, you look at the eye with the lens, the retina, like the optical nerve and all of that. That's what it looks like to me, man. That's what it looks like to me. So, and I believe it's like the collective third eye, of humanity. It's like everything's like micro, macro, micro, macro. So, all right, where am I at with this? All right, hold on, guys. All right. Yeah. Now we have all of these different verses basically warning us against this too. So here we go. And it's like, and why would there be such a warning literally against all of the sorcery too? All right. So we have the prohibition of sorcery. Exodus 22:18 says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Right? Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So they're not just saying don't do it. They're like, don't even let someone live who does it. Right? You got to think. And I think we have a good idea of how dangerous all this shit is, now. If we look at it on like a large scale, I mean, think about why they wouldn't want somebody to have this much influence. If you're able to literally influence someone's free will, you know, imagine that on a grand scale. It's almost, it's not to keep us dumb and in the dark, that way we're not like gods, right? That's like the serpent's trick, right? It's like, oh well, God doesn't want you to be like him, having the knowledge of good and evil, right? Basically like saying like God's a fucking hater, you know that's the only reason God doesn't want you to have this knowledge. But it's like, is that really the truth? Is that really why they don't want us to have this knowledge? Or is it because we can see what's happened today, right? Where a small group of people get a hold of this shit and they can literally make world events happen, right? Just by putting it out there into the collective, Think about it. How many fucking times have you seen things kind of like, and we call this like symbolism, symbology. We call this predictive programming, all of this. And then look at the governments and their studies of MK Ultra and all this trauma-based mind control. I hate to tell you guys, if you look at, the occult, a lot of the occult, especially with witchcraft and anybody that's unfamiliar with invocation, these type of things, a lot of it is just unlocking dormant parts of the human psyche, right? So if we are wrapped in our ancestors, and I don't know what your school of thought on this and what your belief is, but if we are wrapped in our ancestors, our DNA, right, is covering us. I am covered in my ancestors right now. So that means I have all the genetic memory of humanity all the way back to the beginning available to me in my genetics. Okay? There have been how many different resets? We've seen great floods, right? We've seen fucking, let's go look at Sodom and Gomorrah, right? There's been quite a few cataclysms and catastrophes, right, throughout humanity. Like I even told you at the beginning, if we look at the Bible in Genesis, when it talks about the earth was without form and void, right? If we actually look at the etymology of the words, it means like desolate and destruction, right? So it means like it was actually in a state of destruction when it was created in Genesis, meaning there was probably an earth before that, right? There was probably a creation before that. And if we get into books like theosophical schools of thought, like H.P. Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, Helena Blavatsky, she believes that there was multiple epochs, multiple ages that basically coincide with different astrological ages. We call it the precession of the equinox, right? These 2,600-year cycles, right? The Piscean age, the age of Christ, the fish, duality, the two fish, the above and below fish, the age of religion, all of this ruled by, Jupiter, right? Which, that's the king planet, it's the age of Christ, all this shit, right? Um, Before this, we had the age of Aries, right? And this is why Marduk was described as the ram, right? The ram. You even see like the story of like Abraham. He finds like a ram in the thicket when he's going to sacrifice Isaac or whatever, when God tells him to sacrifice him, and he ends up making him stop. Moses the same way. And there are even schools of thought. It's crazy that a lot of this shit was like, these were theories I was talking about forever ago, and now it's just kind of like common knowledge. It's weird for me even. But like looking at Moses too, like, Moses or Moshe, and some people even believe that Moses was Akhenaten, right? And I think that there's something there to that. I don't know if he was or he wasn't, but I do believe that there's something to that because, Moses was in the house of Pharaoh. He was like a fucking high priest. He's a brother of Pharaoh, basically, right? He was adopted, but nonetheless, and we look at the Colburn Bible, which I believe was written on brass, and it's pre-Diluvian, meaning pre-flood. It is the book of Exodus, the story of Exodus, but it's from the Egyptian perspective, right? And it talks about this, young Egyptian pharaoh and him having to leave, right? He had to leave. He had to flee Egypt, just like Moses fled. And during that, it was because of the destroyer. And remember, he described God, right, on Mount Sinai as fire and pillars of smoke, right? And in this, the Colburn Bible, it's described as the destroyer. It's this ruddy red planet comet thing that turned the water to blood, and all of this should bring all this fire and destruction to the earth, and then he had to flee. So it's like we kind of see that. So it's like, you know which is which, really, right? And then even before that, we see in the Taurian age, which would be a Venusian age. Remember, Taurus is ruled by Venus, right? We see this Venusian age, which is like the divine feminine. So we go from the patriarchal, age of Aries to this matriarchal, age of Taurus, right? And this is basically, you look at like the ancient mythos, right? Like with the gods. Prometheus, he steals the 50 sparks, for, enlightenment, because mankind lived in a golden age, which would be the golden age of Saturn, right? When we had the Saturn sun, right? This golden age, and mankind was enlightened, and there was no death, there was no darkness, no evil. Well, basically, Zeus, this bad god that was jealous of us, and think about it, that would be Jupiter, the king planet. He takes away all of this, and he introduces Pandora's box, right? Pandora's box, and we think about the cube god, Saturn's cube, all of this, right? But Pandora's box, and it unleashes all these sprites, right? Which basically are demons, you know, and, they all get unleashed into the world, and they bring suffering and darkness and evil unto mankind. Okay. Well, at the bottom of Pandora's box is, hope. Hope comes out of all of this. Prometheus being basically butthurt because mankind was, in this age of enlightenment. Now everything's been messed up. He steals the divine sparks of life, right? And he basically tricks Zeus, right? He has this offering, which is a bull, and think about Taurus, right? The age of Taurus. And he has two different piles. In one pile, he offers all of the, it's a big, large pile. And he knew that Zeus, being one of these fallen angels, these gods, had a giant ego, And remember, Prometheus, he's like Hermes or whatever. He's a trickster too. So he's not just enlightenment, he's also will deceive your ass. So he has two piles, and the small pile, had all the good stuff, right? All the things that were necessary. And the big pile was a bunch of garbage, but it was a giant pile. And he told Zeus, like, pick between these two piles for this offering, right? And the other one can go to humanity. Well, Zeus, being a big ego, takes the big pile, and it has all the meaningless shit, right? Giving all the good stuff to humanity. And because he played that trick on him, that's where, you get Prometheus being tacked up to a tree, having the vulture come and eat his liver, every 24 hours, right? And he's constantly suffering. And it's like for humanity, basically, right? By giving us the divine spark, basically bringing us enlightenment, because Prometheus being that light bearer, this would be your Hillel, Lucifer figure, Once again, you got to ask, what was that enlightenment? What was that enlightenment? We know that in Jewish mysticism, especially in hedonistic practices, that they have the 1,000 points of light. I'm sure you guys have probably heard of George Bush and him talking about the 1,000 points of light. Well, these 1,000 points of light is basically the premise that God was so full of light that when the Big Bang happened and creation happened, he spoke everything into existence, that his light was so overwhelming that it was even trapped in darkness. So, hedonism, they believe basically like you have to, in order to ascend to the highest point of spiritual awareness and spiritual awakening, you have to descend to your lowest point. So that's where all of the, the orgies come in and shit like that, because they're trying to be their most base, debaucherous self in order to hit rock bottom. That way they bounce back up. That's their belief, right? Because they believe that in the darkness is where the last pieces of God's light is hidden, right? It says in Leviticus, ye shall not eat anything with the blood, neither shall you use enchantment nor observe times. Also in Leviticus 19:31, regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 20, and the soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits and after wizards to go a whoring after them, I will even set my face against that soul and will cut him off from among his people. And I want you to think like why they would even use these words. Why would he say that you're going whoring with another spirit? Right? How does that make sense? How can you go a whoring, right, with another spirit. And you have to think about this. It's because you are in covenant with another spirit, right? You are literally creating something with the new with this spirit. It's like spiritual fornication, if you will. Like you have to be in covenant with God and covenant with Christ in order to have, like, to manifest the good things, the Holy Spirit, to have wisdom, right? Gifts of the Holy Spirit. You have to be in covenant with the Holy Spirit in order to bring these things into fruition in your life, right? Same thing goes on the opposite end. You know, if you're bringing death and destruction, base and debaucherous things, you're in covenant with something that basically provides that, right? So you're whoring, you're spiritually communing with darkness. It says, a man also or woman that hath a familiar spirit or that is a wizard shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them. And think about that. Like it was such a severe infraction, right? That they would stone you to death if this, you know, was something that you were taking place in. Because you had that much of an influence. And it's like, you know, and it's like you gotta think too, whether somebody be doing it intentionally or unintentionally. You know, if you're communing with these things, you're opening yourself up to these things, you know. Uh, Hypothetically, to say like, I'm communing with dark spirits and you're my girlfriend, well, now all of a sudden, because you're communing with me, you're also in communion with dark spirits. That's why it talks about being equally yoked, right? Because it's like, who, you know, birds of a feather flock together. So it's like, you know, if you're surrounding yourself with those that mess with darkness, then you're inviting darkness into your sphere of influence. It's able to have an influence on you. Now, we do know that if we're trying to, you know, cast a spell or anything like that, that it has to have something to stick to. It has to have something to attach to, and sin being the primary thing that it should attach. It says, there shall not be found among you any one that maketh his son or his daughters to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or observer of times, or enchanter, or a wish. And think about passing through the fire. This is, you know, this is Moloch, right? Baal worship, right? The sacrifice of, you know, their offspring, you know, and we'll leave it at that. Now, or a charmer or consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard or necromancer. Necromancer is somebody who works with the dead. So, you know, it's like, and I think what a lot of people don't understand is, like, you know, a lot of people think that, you know, witchcraft is limited to like casting spells, you know. But that's not the case. You know, a lot of people you can practice witchcraft just by bending or manipulating the truth, right? That's a form of witchcraft. Now, if you're trying, you know, you're trying to be really persuasive to somebody and you're bending or manipulating the truth to get them to, you know, to do, you know, your will or do what you want done, that's a form of witchcraft, you know. It says, for all these things are an abomination unto the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee. Thou shalt be perfect with the Lord thy God, for these nations which thou shalt possess hearkened unto observers of times and unto diviners, but as for thee, the Lord thy God hath not suffered thee to do so. He made his sons pass through the fire and observed times and used enchantments and dealt with familiar spirits and wizards. He wrought much wickedness into the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. Right? And you see over and over, right? He caused children to pass through the fire, the valley of the son of Hinnom, and observed times, used enchantments, used witchcraft, dealt with familiar spirits, wizards, wrought much evil. You know, and it's like, and two, it's like when we look at, like, you know, the familiar spirits, like basically, you know, and I don't know how many of you have ever, you know, practiced with this, but, you know, this is usually, you know, animal spirits, right? And you hear people talk about this now, and I don't know if a lot of people are very familiar with it, but when you're talking about your spirit animal, right? this in essence is a you know a familiar spirit. It's like, oh, my spirit animal. So it's like, and there are literal people that you can go to that will tell you what your spirit animal is. You know, it's like you can go to them and they'll be like, oh, you're connected to a bird, or you're connected to wolves, or you're connected to deer, or whatever. You know, and these people are seers of sorts. Um, right, and essentially that's what they're doing, is they're connecting you to a familiar, right? And that's, and notice anything that in the demonic world, these spirits, that's what they use. So they can't inhabit you because of free will, right? So unless you are in covenant with them, or give them permission, or you know have some opening for them to get a foothold, right? A lot of times they will attach to items, objects, or they will use animals, right? And this is because they don't have that living spirit, so it's easy for them, right? It's easy for them to attach to. Now, let's go here. Now, I'm going to show you here in the Lemegeton, right? And I'm going to try not to read very much of this shit, so, because I don't want this, and you can see, so say we're going through a magical working, right? And this is going to let you know too just how, you know, how much of what we do, we say, we hear, we see, all of it has a profound influence and impact, not only on us individually, spiritually, but we can actually reflect this or project this onto others as well, right? Um, you know, whether it's the creation of, you know, servitors, or using sigil magic, or what. So we look at the preliminary invocation. This is Lemegeton. This is I don't know if I want to read this and put it out there, but you can see, right, they're invoking the bornless one that created the heaven and the earth, da 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 da. And watch, I am Moshe the prophet, unto whom thou didst thy mysteries in the ceremonies of Israel, right? So he's literally claiming the title of Moses, the prophet, right? To invoke the bornless one being, you know, that spirit, that consciousness that flows through each and all of us. So I'm not going to go through all this because I don't want to read all of it, right? But this is basically like anytime we're trying to create like a magical working, or you see a magical working being created, I'm just going to kind of like show you some of, I'm not going to, I'm trying not to teach anybody how to do anything they don't know how to do. Because I don't want to create the opposite of what I'm trying to do here. Um, okay. Let's see if we can, right, you see here the Book of Evil Spirits, the Key of Solomon, which contains all the names, orders, and offices of all the spirits that ever Solomon conversed with, together with the seals and characters belonging to each spirit, and the manner of calling them forth to visible appearance in 4 parts. Now, think about Solomon. Solomon built his temple, and we look at like modern day Freemasonry and all this. It's, you know, any Masonic temple and all that. Even if we like look at a lot of the sacred orders and shit, like Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and shit like that, right? A lot of their inner temples are based on the Temple of Solomon. A lot of their rituals that they do from initiation on, right? These rituals are basically building Solomon's temple in the spirit, right? in each level of ritual and initiation is unlocking a part of the person's psyche that was once dormant. Now, if we think that there has been more than one creation, if we've been created, wiped out, created, wiped out, created, wiped out, and we look at like parts of us were actually extremely corrupt, right? Maybe those giants that we've seen in the past, maybe those, are our ancestors, and we still have access to those dark parts of us. They are just in our unconscious mind. And because of our DNA, our genetics, we have the ability to tap into that, right? Through ritual. And these rituals unlock parts of the mind that basically would not be unlocked otherwise. And what I believe, and this is just my own personal belief, I believe if we look at mythology, that's what mythology actually served a purpose for, in ancient times. I feel like, if all these ancient mythos, they told stories that correlated to parts of the unconscious mind, and it was to basically activate, you know, um, and initiate each person as like a rite of passage. They learn these stories, and it was a form of initiation and activating part of these dormant parts of the psyche or our consciousness. Same thing goes if you look at all of the hieroglyphs and petroglyphs and shit like that. I think it's the same thing. If we look at all that symbolism within like ancient Egypt and all of that, like I think they wrote all of this shit down because they knew, there was some sort of cataclysm or catastrophe that was coming. Not only were they trying to save knowledge, right, for the earth, but perhaps, and this kind of just makes you think, what if these entities that were being wiped off the face of the earth, these Nephilim, right, these fallen angels that were being wiped off the face of the earth with these floods and shit, what if this was the only way for them to survive? Right? These spiritual entities, remember, it's like if we don't, even Christ said, right, through your faith you were healed, right? So it's like there has to be this belief, in something, this conscious connection, this belief, this exchange of energy, this focus, this intent, even on Christ himself, in order for him to have the power to work in your life, right? So now think about these other spiritual entities, right? Like, in order for them to exist after the flood, maybe the only way that they could kind of survive everything was to put their stories in symbolism, right? These symbols. So when we read these symbols, it would reactivate, these energies. That way they basically would, live through the aeons, so they'd put it on these giant stones, and you got to think about it too. It's like all of these, pyramidal structures and all these ancient structures, they all sit on ancient ley lines, right? They all sit on fucking ancient ley lines, which are harnessing the earth's power grid, basically the spiritual energy of the earth, you know. And then on all of these pyramidal structures, which are like, the four-sided pyramid is like the optimal shape, to like work with magnetism and ferrofluid and all of this, right? So it's like it harnesses energy, these shapes do naturally, and then with inside of them they have all of these glyphs and these stories and these depictions, which are, they correlate to energetic frequencies as well, written on the inside. So it's like, was this a way for these spiritual entities, these fallen angels, these watchers, whatever they were, was this a way for them to like basically be able to survive into the next age, right, by building all these structures and putting all these glyphs and shit all over it? That way, when we read it again, it would be reactivated in the unconscious mind. It just kind of makes you wonder, is that, and you look at the old world, like the polytheistic world where there was multiple gods and deities. This is all before Christ, you know. And these mythologies were basically a form of indoctrination, right? You learn these mythologies as a rite of passage, but it would basically initiate you into the mysteries, and that's, we look at like the, Plato's cave and all of this, and it's like in us seeing, we're only seeing the shadows on the wall, basically, right now in our current worldview, you know. Um, but really, is there far more to it, that we are seeing? It's like, and basically that allegory too of the shadows being projected on the wall is the allegory of our reality. Us being that phantom, that projection, we are that pale reflection of the spiritual world taking place, right? Now, let's go here. And I'm just going to kind of show you too, and this is fucking wild, okay? It shows you the process, right? Key of Solomon, 4 parts. The first book is the Book of Evil Spirits, called the Goetia, showing how he bound up those spirits and used them in several things, whereby he obtained great fame. Right? We see this still to this day. If you want to sell your soul, right, what do? You sell your soul to the devil, right? People talk about this all the fucking time. The Book of Spirits, purely good and partly evil, which is named um, Theurgia Goetia, or Aerial Spirits. Third part is a book governing the planetary houses. And remember these 7 main planets, the 7 days of the week, 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 chakras. These are planets, means wandering star. Why are they a wandering star? Because they transgressed from their original position, from their original place, meaning they fell. These are the fallen angels, right? And this is your pantheon of gods. These planetary houses, what the spirits belong to, every degree of the signs and of the planets and the signs, called the Pauline art. The 4th part, the Book of Amadel of Solomon, which contains 20 chief spirits which govern the 4 altitudes, 360 degrees of the zodiac. And the 2 last orders of spirits are good, called the Theurgia, are to be sought after divine seeking. The most sacred mysteries were revealed unto Solomon. And Lemegeton is the whole art of King Solomon. Da, 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 da. And it says these books were first found in Chaldea and Hebrew tongues, right? And it's like you think about, Chaldea, and it's like, here we go. So you can see, this is kind of giving you an idea on how each of these works. So it's like you have the correlated sigil right here. You have the sigil on the side, right? And they're all numbered, which one they correlate to, which entity. You can see them start being numbered here at 3, right? So on and so forth, and they're going down. And, I find this to be very interesting that these sigils also correlate to emojis. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that. I could probably pull it up real quick, but, how these ancient sigils actually resemble emojis as well. It's fucking strange. And now you'll see the ranking, right? And we have at the top, we have Baal, right? Baal being the number 1, the first principal spirit, which is the king ruling in the east. Remember, destruction comes from the east. Called Baal or Baal. He maketh thee to go invisible. He ruleth over 66 legions of infernal spirits. He appeareth in diverse shapes, sometimes like a cat, sometimes like a toad, and sometimes like a man, and sometimes all these forms at once. He speaks hoarsely. This is his character, which is used to be warned as a layman before calling him forth, or all he will not do homage. And see, and this is the thing. So, according to whatever it is you're trying to invoke here, with the sorcery, like say we wanted to cast a love spell. Let's go down here. I think it's Citri is one of them. Let's see. I'm just trying to give you an example of how this kind of works. Zepar is one of them. So Zepar is a great duke who appeareth in red apparel and armor like a soldier. His office is to cause women to love men, to bring them together in love. He also maketh them barren. He governeth 26 legions of inferior spirits. So, and when you hear of like him making them barren, this is what's crazy as fuck. So, in a lot of these situations, and this lets you know like what type of entities you're dealing with here. Um, Zepar, or I think that's how you say his name. There's another one called Citri, right, which is another one for love. But Zepar, they all have an N, and it's ENN. It's a chant basically, a chant that you say. Let's see if we can pull it up here. Right, you know how like whenever we're like singing praises to God, the same thing goes if you're dealing with other entities, right? For whatever reason, when we sing, it has like there's more power. There's more power to it. Even you'll see people even when they're like invoking the archangels or like to my right, Michael, right? They'll sing it as they take the sword and invoke the four archangels. The same thing when they chant these ends, right? For these different demons. It's like basically like a little chant or a little song, that you'll sing to each one of these entities. And remember, this is us affecting all of the different realities. And I hope I don't lose people with this. So, what I'm trying to kind of show people is I don't want to teach you how to cast a spell. I just want you to understand how the principles of everything are working at all times within your life, whether you're conscious of it or not. Just because you don't understand it or just because you're not conscious of something doesn't mean that it's not still working or that it's not interacting in a certain way, right? But if you can have awareness of this, then I think it's going to be incredibly beneficial to you because you're going to see that not only do the things that we say, right? The music we listen to, the things that we watch, the colors that we wear, the thoughts that we have. I mean, the scents that we wear, the things that we eat, so on and so forth. All of it, right, has a profound impact on what you're attracting or manifesting, projecting in your life, right? And whatever we are attracting, remember, whatever we're mingling with or co-mingling with in the spiritual realm, we're in covenant with. So you want to make sure that you're in covenant with the right things and that you're not fucking around with something, that's going to really do you some damage especially on a spiritual level. So like this particular spirit Zepar, right? Say we wasn't able to, and like in most situations, if we was going to do a love spell, to Citri for, let's find Citri. I think it's 12. I think he's 12. Yes, Citri, right here. The 12th spirit is Citri. He is a great prince and appeareth at first with a leopard's head and the wings of a griffin. But after the command of the master of the exorcism, he putteth on a human shape, and that very beautiful. He inflameth men with women's love and women with men's love, and causeth them also to show themselves naked, if it is desired. He governeth 60 legion of spirits. His seal is this, to be worn as a layman before thee, right? So, and this is his seal right here, 12. So this one right here on the right, that's his seal. Okay. Now, this particular, sigil is what invokes this entity. Now, say you wanted to bring one of these particular entities into, or anything like this, right? So this can work in a multitude of ways, but we're going to use like a love spell because that's really easy to kind of think of this. Right. So say we're trying to bring about this, not only will we chant the N of Citri, right? Or Zipar or whatever entity to bring us whatever it is we want. We're using this sigil. The sigil is the visual, right? The sigil is the visual. You're connecting with this visually, right? This is a visual representation of this entity. Okay. Now, a lot of times, besides just drawing the sigil, a lot of these entities, they will appreciate you drawing them a picture or singing them a song. I mean, these are all forms of worship, right? So it's like, and it's like you might not think that that's a very big deal, but imagine you driving down the road in your car, and you're singing lyrics to something that the person that created it, you don't know what intentions they had. You don't know what the fuck they were in covenant with. Especially now, we know that a lot of the music industry is so corrupt, right? And they put rituals on their albums and everything to get them to go farther, and have a bigger reach and a bigger impact and all of this. So it's like you don't know what even the person, the type of lifestyle they're living, what they're in covenant with, and now you're singing their song in your car, right? That's you're harmonizing with the frequency of whatever it is. Same thing with the images. We're watching these images on television, whether it's images of gore and death and sex, etc., right? That's all being implanted, consciously in our minds. We're taking on that shit, when we're watching it, when we're listening to it, and we're also putting it out, when we're singing it, etc. Right? So in order to bring one of these entities, the same thing. It's like if I wanted to create, love, right? Like I would get like rose petals, rose petals. I would use a red candle, red for passion. It's like all of the colors of the chakras and stuff. These also correlate to different aspects of us. It's like what we're trying to bring on, right? We use a red candle. We would use rose petals. It's like we're trying to create the atmosphere, basically. And I heard it kind of described like this once. It was like it's like they are existing in a reality, a dimensional space that's right on top of our dimensional space, basically. Right. So it's like we're in two different dimensions, but we're simultaneously existing in the same place, right? Same time. But in order for us to be able to, like, you imagine them in one circle, you're in one circle, right? In order for us to interact, we have to create, a space that allows, that's basically compatible, right, with them. That way, those two circles, they kind of cross over, and there's this liminal space that we can interact with them. They're able to inhabit the same time and space as us, and that's where you see like John D, right, with the Enochian magic, right. That was an attempt to do that, but you got to think the dude was deceived. They literally talked John D and his magical partner into swapping wives, and it basically ruined their marriages, so it's like it's like I wouldn't trust a lot of these spirits that they're dealing with, And like I said, most of these people, Aleister Crowley, he fucking died addicted to heroin and broke. This happens over and over and over. A lot of the people that, do this, and they even say that like he basically had done a really large ritual, right? One that was supposed to take, I think, a year or 2 years. He got about 6 months through this ritual, and it was to summon like 200 demons, basically, probably everything we see in the Lemegeton or more, right? He was trying to summon all these, and he got 6 months through this ritual, having to go to different places throughout the world and all this to do this grand magical working. And the shit got so intense that he quit. It scared him. And they said that he was never the same after that, And he ended up, getting involved in drugs and all this. Like I said, he died, poor. And this happens time and time again. It's like when you think about a person that actually like sells out or something, it's like, all the time, it's like, I don't think that it's always that somebody's joined some fucking secret society or, just decided to be down with the devil. I think it's what they're in covenant with has drastically changed. It's like whenever you've seen the person start, whether it's like a musician or a content creator or an actor or whatever, it's like when you've seen them start at the beginning of their craft, it was innocent because it was pure. It was like a pure art form, and it's like, but you see, when something becomes more of a business and stuff like that, they start serving, money, and they start serving, to feed lust and desires and shit like that, and they become in covenant with darker things, right? And that's where you see that change in people. It's like the light in their eyes kind of goes out. But like I said, if we were trying to create like something in order to be able to affect the reality. It's like we want to be able to invite that energy into the space. So it's like we would sing the in, right? We'd sing the chant, the song. That's speaking the word, putting that vibration. We would rose petals, different types of frankincense, myrrh, incense, right? All of this stuff, and it's creating the aroma, the atmosphere, right? Um, that is compatible with said entity. We're using the sigil. That's the visual representation, right? The visual representation to invoke or invite this in. Whether or not we're giving it herbs or we're drawing pictures or we're singing songs, all these things are working on different levels, right? To make the space compatible to allow that entity to come in, right? And then once you're in communication with that entity, and that's where we get into, like the one we were talking about a moment ago, Zipar, right? He's not only got the power of love, he's also got the power to make somebody barren, right? So basically, if you're disrespectful to that spirit, or he doesn't like your offering, you wanted to fall in love, and this dude might decide to curse you and, make you're never able to have kids. So, I mean, like different things can come of this, and each one here, let me go here too. Let me, while I'm on it. All right. And see, we're trying to harness certain things too, right? So if we're trying to do something for love, we've got the sigil, right? We'll have a picture of the person, right? So we've got the visuals there. We've got the picture of the person. Um, you might have their hair. You might have an item that belongs to them, something like that, right? This brings in the visual, the personal items, right? You're chanting the in, you're using the red candles, you're using the rose petals, right? All these things, right? We're tapping into every part or aspect of the reality in order to make something come to fruition. And I want you to think about every aspect of your life, like whenever you gear up for the day, like what are the things you're tapping into as you start your day? you know what is the music you're listening to? What are you watching? Are you watching the fucking news with, like, it's talking about all the terrible things happening? Are you going online watching a bunch of hateful, divisive political shit? Like, what are you tapping into? Because you're going to be connecting with said energy, for the rest of your day when you do so. And this goes down to how we dress, how we talk, like everything, right? Everything. Um, We are electrochemical antennas. We're constantly receiving, but we're also constantly projecting as well, you know? And whatever it is we're projecting is what we're going to receive, right? So it's like whatever we're giving off, you know, God or the universe or creation, the only thing it doesn't understand what your intention is. It doesn't give a shit what your intention is, right? That's why whenever you do like a magical ritual or something, and it's like, and I hate to keep using this as like an example, but it's true. So it's like whenever you're doing like a magical ritual, they say to forget about that shit, right? After you're done with the ritual, forget about it. Why is that? Because, well, you know, after you conduct it, if you start having doubts and thoughts and, you start getting in your head and worrying about shit, that's going to go into your ritual, right? It's going to fuck everything up. So it's like the universe, and this is with prayer, anything, the universe doesn't care what your intentions are, right? It's just picking up what the thoughts you're putting out. It's picking up the energy you're giving off, right? The vibe you're giving off, the frequency you're giving off. So it's like, even though, and it's the same thing with like the brain, it doesn't know the difference between when you're watching shit like that, right? It's like, and it scares you. It's like, it doesn't know the difference between real and fake, you know? It just knows that that's what's being sent to it. That's why, if the body has constant anxiety, people's health starts to decline, right? Your body doesn't understand that the reason you're in fight or flight is just because you're worried. It just knows you're in fight or flight. So it shuts down your immune responses and you start getting sick. You know, Same thing. It's like if you're constantly being negative, the universe doesn't think, oh, well, he's thinking about all this terrible stuff happening and he's thinking that he's poor and he's in, a lack mentality and all of this, right? Um, he doesn't believe that he's, worth love or whatever, right? Like, but deep down, he really wants blessings. Deep down, he really wants love. He really wants, it's like, that's not how it works. It's whatever you're putting off, you know? So if you're constantly being bombarded with like fucking, you know, thoughts of like, doubting your self-worth and shit like that, that's what you're putting out there. So that's what's going to come back to you, you know? The universe isn't picking up and like it doesn't decipher what you really meant. It's just whatever was sent out there. Same thing with the spiritual realm, So it's like you're trying to create a fucking love spell, and you come into that ritual, angry or something. That's not a good vibe. You're not going to get back whatever it is you were trying to create. That's not what's going to come through on the other side. That's why the stuff is so fucking dangerous, right? Not only does it give us the power to basically bend and uh, use the laws of creation and reality to our will, or to even circumvent the free will of other people, and employ entities to do things that, um, which whatever you employ the entity to do, like I said, whether it's you watching astrology videos, right? You're in covenant with that spirit of astrology, whether you think so or not, you are. Whether you don't, and like I said, the spirit realm, the conscious realm, it doesn't matter if you fucking agree, right? Like you can say I'm not in covenant with any spirits of astrology. Well, if you're watching astrology, if you're studying astrology, yes, you are. You know, you are, whether you want to or not, just by interacting with it, you are. Um, and that's why I think it's really screwed up. Is like when you see like how easily it is to influence others with this stuff. And I think that that's why this knowledge has been so forbidden, you know, so forbidden because it's so dangerous. It's like, you think if you was to put something on television, right, that's got ritual implications. And we've seen this. I mean, I'm sure you guys have, seen this. There's a lot of dark shit now in movies, TV shows. I mean, look at people, a lot of the shows are fake, but just think about someone that's ghost hunting, you know? And you're watching that. You're watching them interact with the spirit, usually demonic entities at that. It's like you're participating in this. You're a part of this now. And like I said, it doesn't go by what your intention is. It just goes by, like the universe doesn't give a fuck about your intention, you know. Now, let's see here. Right. And you see too, whenever they're invoking these spirits, it's like, they are not only are they setting the entirety of the environment to be able to, to bring the spirit, you know, uh, because you've got the circle. Basically, the circle is what keeps you protected. A lot of people don't understand this, but that magic circle is, to keep your ass safe, right? And then you're usually invoking them in some, which like we've already scrolled past it, but usually like a triangle or something like that, because the angles, and this is like if you look at like all the ancient architecture, this is something I've noticed. At least if you look at like the ancient architecture, which we call Tartarian, a lot of people believe like the Tartarians created this shit now. um, a lot of their buildings were like they were rounded, right? They weren't like now. Everything's cubed and boxed and it's got, angles, right? Angles traps energy, right? It traps energy, you know. Um so basically, like if we look at like the triune being and shit, basically like the triangle was one of the first, I think it's God is the first point, spirit is the second point. I can't remember exactly what the third point is. Maybe it's man. I'm not sure, but basically the 3 points that the triangle is how you trap an energy, right? That's the basis. Man is, we're the pentagram or we're 5 points, but um in order to, trap energy into something, the triangle is how you do that, right? It's got the angles. And think about all the pyramidal structures too across the earth, you know that right there is like a kind of like a hint to what these people may or may not have been doing. A lot of people believe that these pyramids, um, and these giant monolithic structures and shit were actually brought into place through the manipulation of sound. Okay. Um, that may be so, right? I feel like these ancient civilizations were definitely advanced. Um, and like I said, if we look at like the four-sided pyramid and how it can, is a conduit for, magnetism and all of this, right? Perfect. And how they all are on these energetic ley lines, how they had, all the symbols and, sigils written all over the walls on the inside, which some of them were, rituals that were written out across the walls. A lot of them instructions, for the underworld, et cetera, which, you're writing this on something and it's being put into the ether, right? It's being put into the ether. You're imprinting it, right? Just by writing it. All of these are different forms or expressions of the creative energy. If you think about it, uh, whenever we say something, we're speaking it, like God who spoke the word. In the beginning was the word was with Christ, right? He spoke it, right? let there be light, right? So when we speak, that's a form of creation. We're sending out sound, frequency, vibration, right, to literally physically impact the reality. You know, same thing when we create, images, right? That's why no graven image, right? We're creating images with pictures and paintings, and that's why art imitating life. We're literally putting it into, its own expression, right? The image or the symbol or the character, the letter. That's an energetic frequency as well. It's just another way of expressing it, right? And imprinting on the reality, you know. So we can speak it, we can write it, right? And think about it with you know, what was it? When God confused all the languages, you know? Even though all the languages were confused, you can still say something, right, 30 different ways and it mean the same exact thing, right? So you can speak a vibration 30 different fucking ways, right? That's that shows you like how many different levels, right? Like there is to this shit when it comes to creating something, Everything that we're doing, we have the thought form, we have the word, we have the image, we have all of this, that allows us to actually create and manifest things within our own life. We can do it to, and that's why the tongue has the power of life or death, right? It's like we can curse ourselves or bless ourselves. Now let's go here. Okay. Okay, I don't need that. All right. Hold on, guys. All right. All right, here we go. I think we stopped. All right, so I'm going to take this back to. All right, we had the spells, all that ritual magic. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So right. So I even talked about this Saul and the Witch of Endor, right? Saul seeking the medium to, contact Samuel. Then said Saul unto his servant, seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said to him, behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor, right? A familiar spirit being, and you think about like familiar curses and shit like that. And it's like, and you wonder why demons are able, like people are always so fucking impressed with that shit. I think it's hilarious, actually. It's like, like people are impressed with someone that is able, and this is somebody I read tarot cards, natal charts, all this. I've done all this for years, right? It's like, and people are always so impressed with all this, and it's like, yeah, man, but these familiar spirits, some of these are like, these demons have been with your family for fucking years. Just like you have guardian angels, you don't think like if you have guardian angels assigned to you, like there are demonic entities that are literally assigned just to corrupt your ass, on the other end of the spectrum. And it's like, and when they're telling you things about yourself, or telling you things about people that's died, if this entity is outside of time, right? He lives forever, it's like you don't think they would know everything about you, you know what I mean? And know everything about your family. So it's like when people think that it automatically must come from God when someone's giving them some prophecy or something, I think it's fucking hilarious, you know? And it's like, and we get to like all of the people like what like the evangelists and shit too now, and like modern Christianity. right? Like these prosperity gospels and shit, right? Like these are forms of witchcraft too. Like all these people speaking all these prophecies. These are dark sayings that they're doing. They're like, oh, and it's like, and you look at them too, how all of them, like, you judge them by their fruits. Look at like a lot of the modern Christian movement, right? And look at what they're connected to. You can't tell me that someone that's connected to, you know, Trump, MAGA, all of this stuff. It's like, I hate to tell you, but like, Christ doesn't have a political party. You know what I mean? Like, there's no political affiliation for Christ, you know? And we look at like MAGA, just for instance, right? It derived from the word magus. It means magician. It's from the temple of Set, or the temple of Satan, you know? And you think about the red horse and the red hats and all this that takes peace from the earth. It's like it just kind of makes you wonder, you know. We have shamanism, spirit journeys, trance states. I just mentioned this earlier. Animal spirits, plant medicines, ancestor communication. Now I want you to think about people that are like going on these fucking going to Costa Rica or different places, and they're having experiences with plant medicines, right? Uh, whether it's DMT, um, which you experience entities with dimethyltryptamine, um, or it's psilocybin, mescaline, um, LSD, uh, peyote, any of these, right? Any of these, even the ibogaine, right? Which I heard is amazing for people that are suffering from addictions and PTSD and all this shit. Well, not everybody comes out of these spiritual experiences um, a new man, right? Not everybody comes out of this shit on top of the world. I'm just telling you that right now. Some people come out of this, and there are doors that are opened in their perception that allow entities, to come into their life, right? You hear the same thing with like Kundalini. A lot of people, and I think um, it's got a name. There is like, it's like Kundalini psychosis or some shit like that, where if like and maybe like people can speak to this. Let's see, but like Kundalini. Just I missed you too. Thank you so much. But it's like people looking at, and I'm trying to look at the chat real quick. Sorry, but like looking at like Kundalini and shit like that. Like people, that psychosis from Kundalini. Oops, what the fuck is going on? All right. So like the Kundalini psychosis is what I was trying to talk about. So Kundalini psychosis, you hear about people that have like this activation of their Kundalini. Remember, this is serpent energy, right? This is serpent energy. Kundalini is serpent energy. So, is this the serpent in the garden, right? Is like that serpent that's inside of us, right? Like, or the staff that turns into a serpent. Remember, the serpent gets devoured by the other one, like when Moses and shit, like, anytime we see like the rod and staff, it represents kingship. It can also represent the spine, you know? So, it's the serpent and the staff. Are they talking about the Kundalini? But we think about Kundalini, and there's many people that have had Kundalini activation. I would love to know too. Like, tell me in the comment section, I guess. If you're a person that's had Kundalini activation and it's fucked you up, I want to hear about it. I definitely want to hear about it. I'm interested. I can just talk about from my own personal experience. When I went through Kundalini activation years ago, and I wouldn't, you know what? I honestly wouldn't even advise people um, If I could give anybody advice, it would be to stay the fuck away from all of that stuff. That's what it would be. Honestly. Honestly. I think there are just certain things that mankind is not meant to know and that we're not meant to play with. And sorcery in different versions of the occult and all of this, I think that is part of that, and I've had to learn that the hard way. So, um, but this Kundalini, we've seen people like they have this Kundalini psychosis. It's like they fucking have hallucination and all kinds of shit. It's like, even people have a hard time and it's like, feeling like they can't keep their spirit in their own damn body, after having these activations, and they say that this happens a lot with people that have experienced trauma, like at a young age, you know, because it's like, say you were like in an abusive situation or a chaotic situation as a child, it's like you almost have to like, balance out the energy of the room, and because of that you're used to basically like being outside of yourself. It's this whole thing. So let's see, where am I at with this? 1 second, guys. Where the fuck I am. Yeah, most systems begin with a desire to obtain something beyond the ordinary human ability, right? So most of the magical systems, and like I said, this and I hate to oversimplify it, but basically it does break down to this. It's like, thy will be done, or do what thou wilt, right? It's like you're really only doing one of the two at the end of the day. I mean, I hate to oversimplify it and make it seem that simple, but that really is, it is that simple. It truly is that simple. It's like you're either following God's will for your life and you're in alignment with God and you're submissive to God, or you're not. Right? Like there is like that's the lukewarm shit. That's why, like in the Bible, it's talking about the church of Laodicea, right? And remember, these seven churches, are these ages, that he's talking about, or what, but the church of Laodicea, right? He says, "You're neither hot nor cold; you're lukewarm. So I'll spew you out of my mouth," right? It's like you can't ride the fence on this shit. You're either all in or you're out, right? That's all there is to it. Like when it comes to this stuff, it's like period, you know. And Jordan Peterson, he talks about like like a lie, right? And it's like, a lie may seem very harmless. They call them little white lies and shit like that. It may seem really fucking harmless, and it may seem like, yeah, well, it's just a little lie. It's not a big deal, right? But basically, even the smallest of lies, right, is it's in opposition. When you lie, you're in opposition of reality, right? So now you have the totality of reality basically going against you, you know. Um, whether it's a small lie or not, right? And that's why lies over time, they build momentum and they get larger and grander. And it's like, and you have all of this reality going against you. It's like you're literally fighting against reality itself, you know? And reality was created in such a way that it's got these built in laws and built in rules, That's why, we attract, whatever we put out. So when we're putting out bad shit, it comes back to us. So it's like people, they use witchcraft. They decide to use sorcery for these things, knowledge of hidden things, power over certain circumstances. They could use it for protection, healing, wealth, influence, revenge, or contact with spiritual beings. In Genesis 3, it says, "And the serpent said unto woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Right? That forbidden knowledge and self exaltation. Right? And I talked about this at the beginning. You know, um, this spiritual corruption, you can almost look at it as like a spiritual parasite. You know, we got sick when we did this, we got sick, and what happened? You know, Eve conceived Cain and Abel, right? Cain being of the serpent, and Abel being, of Adam. You know, we have these two seeds that are brought into fruition because of this, and we're forever corrupted afterwards. Like, the whole thing with Jesus and stuff is because of this original corruption, right? Is to try to restore our place, back to heaven. And like I said, when you even look at like the book of Enoch and the Watchers, right, there has never been a greater punishment in the history of creation than what those Watchers were given, for teaching us about all of this. Now, the practitioner, the sorcerer, different cultures have different names. We have magician, sorcerer, witch, wizard, medium, shaman, priest, or occultist. And this is believed to require secret knowledge, initiation, training, ritual authority, and connection to spiritual forces. You know, um, yeah. Well, let me go past this. All right. Invocation, summoning. We have the gods, angels, spirits, ancestors, demons, elemental beings, and nature spirits. In Leviticus, regard not them not that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Right? And if we look at all this too, and I want you to kind of think, like, this has been going on for a long time. The desired manifestation, spirits give information, curses cause harm, charms provide protection, ritual changes circumstance. Right. So each one of these spirits that, can you imagine living in a world or a reality? It's almost like an outdated version. Whenever you're practicing anything like this, to me, in my opinion, it's like, if God's will for your life is the highest, greatest will, right? You cannot get any higher than God's purpose and God's will for your life. So it's like that's the greatest good, right? Your greatest possible outcome, you know, is that there's no higher spirit in the hierarchy than that as well, you know. So it's almost like when we go back to doing these type of things, this is like pre-Christ. It's like maybe at one time, like this was acceptable because there was the sacrifice of Christ hadn't taken place, right? So it's like we were cursed, so it's like we had to basically everything that we had to manifest or create, right, through covenant with spirits. And it's like that's why you see like the polytheists, it's like they were worshiping all these different gods. There was a god for everything, right? Whether it was love, war, wealth, health, wisdom, it didn't matter. There was a god for everything, you know there was a God for everything. And it's like because they had to, they were under a curse. So it's almost like they had to interact with these different entities in order to get what they wanted because they had, basically placed themselves outside of God. They couldn't, God can't be in contact with sin. Well, if we're cursed, right? Now we look at Acts 8 and it says, and when Simon saw that through laying on the apostles' hands, the Holy Ghost was given. He offered them money, saying, give me also this power, that on whomsoever I lay hands, he may receive the Holy Ghost. But Peter said unto him, thy money perish with thee, because thou hast thought that the gift of God may be purchased with money. Thou hast neither part nor lot in this matter, for thy heart is not right in the sight of God. Repent therefore of this thy wickedness, and pray God, if perhaps the thought of thine heart may be forgiven thee. And it's like dudes trying to literally buy, um, the gift of the Holy Spirit. He's like, yo, I'll pay you, like, let me get the Holy Spirit. You got to think these apostles, right? And disciples, they were going around, they were causing people to see with magical power. They were, resurrecting people from the dead. Literally Pentecost, right? They start speaking, and they're speaking, and everybody, they've got all these different countrymen of different languages, and they can understand what they're saying in their own language, right? So what they're appearing to do must have looked like some crazy magical stuff to these people back then. I mean, think about it, Like, if you really think about the ministry of Christ and what his disciples and the apostles and all of them, Paul, like all of these dudes were doing, this was like amazing, amazing stuff, right? Like, they're getting all this. And remember, it's like the power of faith, right? So their belief, they're believing in this power of God, and God's endowing them with this, right? But they're only able to receive that power because they're what? They're in alignment with God. The same thing if we're, when we're in alignment with darkness. And you have to understand, this is one thing I've kind of come to realize whenever we look at like the power of witchcraft and all of this, it's like it may feel like you're getting, a good deal in a lot of this shit. And it's like you may feel like you're getting something good back, but that's the thing. It's like whatever it is you're offering, that's not the only cost, right? That's not the only cost for whatever you're going for. Whether you're going for wealth, fame, love, it doesn't matter. The ritual is just to get the guy in the room. That offering, those herbs, those candles, those chants and ends, and all of that shit. That's just to get the cat in the room, right? That's just to get him in there. That way you can interact with it. That's not, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. That's not the deal on the back. It's like you can't read the fine print, you know? Can't read the fine print. A lot of people think that they're getting some, and it works. That's the crazy thing. It works. It works. If it didn't work, people wouldn't do it. You know, if it didn't work, people wouldn't do it. And we just have verse after verse after verse, right? Verse after verse after verse. And we can see God's judgment against Babylon. It's like, and I want you to think like what modern day Babylon is. And I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and I don't know if I want to get all into this in this one. Like I said, this is my first live stream in months, guys. So if I'm not on point, you just have to forgive me, and probably take me a couple to get back in my stride. But we see this comparison now, and it's like it's not even a comparison. The United States is modern day Babylon, right? The United States is modern day Babylon. And remember, Babylon had judgment against it, right? And it was for its sorceries. Now, I want you to kind of think of like everything now. The United States, when we look at like all of the modern day Babylon, end times Babylon, it imports and exports everything down to human souls and people, right? And if we look at that, like the only country in the entire world that, makes everything on that list and, Revelation, all those imports and exports, there's only one place in the world that has all that. It's the United States, right? We see the comparisons of Trump, right, to King Cyrus, right, the first time around, him, being minted on a gold coin, him being the outsider who became the king of Babylon, right? He was the outsider who became the king of Babylon, right? Modern day Babylon. And in his fourth year, Babylon fell. Well, if you remember in Trump's fourth year, uh, we had his transition to Biden, and there was 30,000 National Guard troops that occupied the nation's capital, right? The nation fell that day, right? We were under military occupation in our own capital, and that's the fourth year. He was, we hear this, the king who was not, and is yet to come. Well, Trump was elected, then he lost, he was not, then he came again, right? Yet to come. He takes the fatal wound to the head and lives. He got shot in the fucking head and he lived, right? And the whole world wondered after the beast. He appeared to have all these different solutions. And I don't care if you agree with me or not. I'm not saying he's the Antichrist. I don't know. But I'm saying nobody's ever fit the description like he has. And this Antichrist, he deceives everybody, even the Christians, right? And then he turns against them. And what have you seen? You know, he acted like he was for the people. The Christians got his ass elected, and he's flipped on everybody. You know, we look at the Abraham Accords, the promise of peace and security before sudden destruction, right? We get this peace deal, and all of a sudden we have the Iran war. And now, this shit is looking like it's about to be global. You see the inflation and the gas prices and all this. And it's like, it thinks, remember that red horse, that red hat, right? He takes peace from the earth, causing, men to kill one another. All of this taking place after that white horse, right? Who had the bow, right? For conquering and to conquer. And if you guys remember some of my previous work, right? That was all the COVID shit, right? The Stephanos to Reed or Twine, right? The World Health Organization and the UN. We've talked about all of that, and then that red horse taking peace from the earth, you know, which we then end up seeing as a result of all of this. We see like, inflation, right? The cost of a day's wage is the cost of a meal, right? Like all of this eventually comes, you know. And I don't think we could ever say that, the United States was ever closer to a point of collapse than it is now. We've never seen so much division as we've seen, and people are now starting to wake up to it. But it's like you even see too, that in the Bible it talks about, in the last days, like right before the destruction comes, it's when they turn on Israel, right? And you look at us now, and it's like Americans are fed up with Israel, right? They're just fed up. They're done. They're done. Israel has ran our country for a long time. It looks like, if you want my opinion, Donald Trump is a fucking agent of Israel. I mean, he's controlled opposition. I feel like this guy is a fucking traitor. I feel like he's literally a plant from Israel, you know? So we look at the judgment of Babylon, right? And it's for its sorceries. It says, but these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon thee in their perfection for the multitude of thy sorceries and for the great abundance of thine enchantments. When you look at it, like Babylon intoxicates the world with her sins, right? She's the great harlot. We look at Statue of Liberty. Let me see if I can pull this up here and show you Statue of Liberty. He's Lucifer. See? And you can see it right here. And you see the chain on the feet. You see the spikes of Hecate, the flame of Prometheus, right? Right here. Right? Got the arm raised, all of it. You look at the Statue of Liberty, this is what's crazy. It's a transgender, right? This is a man in a dress. It's not a woman. Those spikes, Libertas, right? Those spikes, right? Hecate. You can see all of it here. Look at that. Helios. Look at that. You think that we're not a Christian nation, whether you've been told that or not. You can see it's fucking very obvious. And think about it, like through Hollywood, right? The wood of the holly, right? Like that's a magical wand. It's a magical wand. Los Angeles, right? The you know, for angels, right? City of fallen angels, right? And we have the wood of the holly because it's sorcery. They're using moving images, graven images, right? In order to deceive people, right? Tell a vision. They're telling you a vision, right? Same thing with the music industry. Lucifer is the god of music as well, right? He's the god of music, So it's like you see, this is through their sexual. This is it, right? The idolatry, all of it, promiscuity, all of it, right? This is us, you know. This is us, the United States. For thou hast trusted in thy wickedness, thou hast said, none seeth me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge it hath perverted thee, and thou hast said in thine heart, I am, and no one else beside me. Right? That's Satan putting himself on the throne of God. That's what we're doing. We've elevated ourselves. We're a godless nation, right? When we think about legalizing gay marriage, every civilization has fallen after accepting homosexuality. It's just a fact. All the civilizations and cultures, once they go that direction, they collapse. You can take that for what you will. Therefore shall evil come upon thee. Thou shalt not know from whence it riseth, and mischief shall fall upon thee. Thou shalt not be able to put it off, and desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know. Stand now with thine enchantments, and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth. If so be thou shalt be able to profit, if so be thou mayest prevail. Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from the things that shall come upon thee. So it's telling you, it's like, let the astrologers, let the sorcerers, let all these people that, basically fucked you over and spoiled everything, let them save you. Let them save you. Behold, thou shalt be as stubble, the fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There shall not be a coal to warm at, nor fire to sit before it. Thus shall be unto them what thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth. Thou shalt wander every one his quarter, none shall save thee, right? No one will save thee. And notice that all the countries, like it's like it's the great merchant, right? So all the merchants and shit like that, they're sad, right? Because they were making money off of us, right? We contaminated the entire world with our darkness, our sexual immorality and promiscuity, our witchcraft, our idolatry, all of these things. We especially through the internet, right? We've controlled the whole world through our monetary system. We overthrow all their governments. It's like we've done it all. And we openly worship this shit now. You look at like Epstein files and shit like this. This is Baal worship at its finest, right? The PDFs and shit, right? Like you don't get any more like satanic and they were performing these rituals, to sacrifice, and stuff like that because in sex magic, because sex is the power of creation, right? They're able to have more powerful sorcery that way because they're using the power of creation, sex. It charges the air, you know? It's a literal act of creation. When you have sex, the male imprints on the female, and it's basically copy and paste, and then a person's made. And you can take that energy and direct it towards things. Yeah. And we have this whole Epstein class that's practicing these things, and it's all been brought out to the light now, right? And nothing's come of it. No one's been punished. It shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord, that I will cut off the horses out of the midst of thee, and I will destroy thy chariots. I will cut off the cities of thy land and throw down all thy strongholds. I will cut off witchcrafts out of thine hand, and thou shalt have no more soothsayers. Thy graven images also will I cut off, and thy standing images out of the midst of thee, and thou shalt no more worship the work of thine hands. And I will pluck up thy groves out of the midst of thee, so I will destroy thy cities, and I will execute vengeance and anger and fury upon the heathen, such as they have not heard. Now think about that, saying, I will bring vengeance down upon you like you've never even heard. you know, like you've never even heard. So, when we think about all of this, it's like, what are we allowing into our lives? What are we creating for ourselves by the things that we're speaking, by the things that we're watching, by the things that we're listening, by the things that we're connecting to? You know, I think if we could remember anything, it's that spirit doesn't give a shit about our intentions, right? It's just picking up on what we're putting down, period. You know, and remember, it says, come out of her lest you share in her destruction. So it's like if you have the knowledge and awareness of what's taking place on the global scale, and most of you do, you can see what's happening. Most of you understand this. And I'm sure, it would probably be a prime opportunity to apply it to your individual life as well, right? Because remember, everything has a spirit behind it. And whatever we're interacting with, we are in covenant with. You know, and by being in covenant, you better know the deals, the agreement of the deal you're making is what I mean, right? So it's like, what are the parameters of that agreement? What are you giving And in exchange for what, right? That's the thing. A lot of us don't know what it is we're giving up for what we're interacting with. So I'm going to wrap this one up. I don't want to take any more of your guys' time. I do want to thank you guys so much for joining me. Please, please, please make sure to hit the like on this. Thumbs up. Let's see if we can get this. Yeah, thumbs up. Share this for me. It'll help me get it out there. Subscribe, YouTube, Best Damn Podcast Official, Best Damn Podcast, Facebook, Best Damn Podcast, Rumble, all that shit, Twitch. And if you guys want to tip or support or whatever, it's paypal.me, the Best Damn Podcast, Cash App, Best Damn Podcast, or join us over on patreon.com, Best Damn Podcast Official. All the links are in the description. I'll probably be streaming on the regular, so I guess I'll see you guys tomorrow night. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.